in the 1960s as the second.
Welcome everyone to the Journey
The
Program's
National Seashore looks
very first virtual mystery trip. I'm Kelly Robert, UBT Journey Program Manager. And I always say this, but I always forget my manners at the end of any of these sessions. So before we go any further, I want to thank my colleague, Caitlin Moore, who is always so willing to help out with these virtual journey events. She takes care of everything IT related so that I can focus on all of you. And that means a lot to me, that I don't have to worry about any of those details. Also, Nikki Davison, who's home with a sick kiddo today, but is just a marketing coordinator extraordinaire. She helps me connect all the dots in all the preparation for this. So I'm appreciative of her as well. It is so nice to see all of you. I'm just getting really excited seeing all these names. You turned out for the virtual mystery trip. And this trip has a really long history in the UBT Journey program, and before that, when we were the FAIR program. I have to give a quick shout out to Katie Phipps, Donna Gill, and Dick Vostein, because they really elevated that mystery trip. And it was always just a one-day trip to the best of my knowledge, but that mystery trip to something that people just clamored to sign up for and go on. And the trip kind of retired with them. And when I stepped into the program, what year was that? 2014-ish? We were just starting. It was one of the things I was asked to do was resurrect that. And I knew I had big shoes to fill, huge. And it took us a little while. Les Almond and I got started on it. And then when Les left, then it was Ashley Howard and I. And we made some tweaks, and we knew we were on the right path when, again, the registration was full and we had a wait list, and we always had such a good time on those trips. And I kept hearing that from everyone, that not only did they miss traveling during the pandemic, but they really missed that mystery trip. And so I wanted to do something, and it was something that made sense for this period of time that we're in. And enter today's guest. I'm going to let him reveal his other role or capacity, but he is the director of Heritage Clubs International. That's a group that I belong to. It's an organization for bank club directors. And that's essentially what the Journey program is. We don't have a name, like the Super Senior Club or anything, but we're still basically a bank club or bank program. I wouldn't belong to a Super Senior Club. I don't even like it when they offer me a senior discount at Popeyes. I take it, but I don't like that they offer it to me. So this gentleman that you see on the screen is the director of this organization, and he does a fantastic job ensuring that all of us that belong, our mission is just to deliver the best bank club or program experience possible. And he makes sure we all pull that off and that we make great connections. I've met the most incredible group of people, other bank club directors and Convention and Visitors Bureau folks and travel professionals through that club. So our conference this year was virtual, and I got this idea, and I came after Ted like a bulldog on a bone and about this idea. And anybody who knows me knows that when I get an idea for the program, I really don't take no for an answer. So he complied, and actually that makes for a good story. He was pretty excited about it. And so he is going to take you on this marvelous mystery tour. You don't have to do anything. Just go along for the ride. Actually, you might have to do a little something. He's going to give you some clues. And down at the bottom of the screen, again, there's a chat feature, a little balloon, and it says chat. If you want to put your answers, your questions, your comments, just type them to everyone, or you can adjust the chat and send them just to me. Then in between stops, is that right, Ted? In between stops, we're gonna see if we can't solve the mystery. And by we, I mean all of you. So good luck to you. Have a lot of fun. Hang on, because we'll have door prizes when we're done. And Mystery Guide, take it away.
Thank you, Kelly, and welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be here. I have to say this is a first for me. I've done a number of travel shows, of course. I also own a tour company, and it's the tour company that is doing this presentation for you. I don't want to reveal the name of the tour company lest you look it up and get the answers online, but I will share it with you when we get to the end of the presentation. We're a company that's 40 years old, and we've been working with bank clubs across the country for many, many years. So we have a really good idea of what it takes to make for a great trip. And today, I'm doing something that I haven't done, which I've done virtual travel shows, but I've never done a virtual mystery travel show. Usually I'm showing maps and geography and all of that sort of stuff to get you excited about the place. But instead, what I'm going to be doing today is telling you about 4 different destinations, 4 different tours, if you will. They're kind of put into story format, in which you will see that there is some commonality between them. But I will take a break after each one and give you an opportunity to guess what that destination is. And I think that a couple of them will be quite easy, and a couple might be a little bit more challenging. But in any case, we'll have fun doing it. And so I welcome all of your comments, questions, answers, and so on. I'm going to begin by showing my screen. So if you'll bear with me while I share it, you will be taken into this journey a little bit through the power of PowerPoint. So hopefully, Kelly, you can see that screen okay. And I will just go forward here. So my plan is to tell you 4 tales. These will be stories based in a place I'll not identify until you've had a chance to guess where they take place. In each story, I'm going to try to create a sense of place by telling of the land and its people. Some fiction, some truth, and for you to decide. So I'll first present all the clues to you to guess and then interact with you as to your best guesses. I'll then share some pictures that you would be seeing if you went on a tour to this area today. So to set the scene for all the stories, we must go back 14,000 years to the period when the Ice Age began to come to an end and the ice retreated away from the land towards the northern and southern poles. You can see on this map, the white areas on the Earth's surface was how far south from the North Pole the ice came and how far north from the south the ice came. And during that 4,000 year period, the ice receded. And as it receded, it scarred the land. It scarred it from the highest mountains. This is the Scandinavian Ice Sheet. So that's what it looked like in Europe. You can imagine that. And here's what it looked like in North America with the Laurentian Ice Sheet on the east and the Cordillera in the ice sheet in the west. As the ice scratched the surface, it was relentless and it just moved back upon itself over a long period of time though. And it left behind these incredible features that we know of today. So from the highest mountains that looked like this to what they look like today, to even where you are in the plains area that were just covered in ice in some cases, and then what they look like today. It created freshwater lakes, rivers, and increased the size of our saltwater oceans and seas. While the world we live in today continues to reshape geologically through erosion, storms, and ocean currents, it all moves so slowly we hardly notice. you might think of this as the greatest natural wonder ever found, the Earth as we see it today between glacial periods. So let me begin with our first tale. The first tale is the geologic story of a great lake and river system. And it's for you to determine what that great lake and river system is. This is the geologic story we hope you will want to visit someday soon. It's a freshwater system which comprises, believe it or not, 21% of all of the fresh water on Earth is in this one lake system. And as you look at this globe, on one of those continents, you will actually be able to see that lake system. That's how large it is. It's a series of 5 interconnected lakes covering over 94,000 square miles. Our destination today is a unique geologic characteristic to this system, as 4 of these lakes all sit at roughly the same elevation, and the 5th lake sits almost 350 feet below the others. All this fresh water was left behind by the glaciers, and today, in those lakes you see on the screen, 99% of the water is legacy water. It's the original glacial water. And just 1% renews itself with rainfall and evaporation. So as you look at the screen, hopefully you can see my cursor. This large lake here in the upper left flows into these 2 lakes. And that center lake then flows down into this lake. And all of those lakes are at roughly the same elevation. But then from this lower lake into the last lake, a river was formed because it had to drop 350 feet down to this 5th lake. Oops, I'm sorry, that went the wrong direction. There we go. So the water found a single low pathway and began to carve out a channel to form the river today that carries that natural flow from those 3 lakes down into the 4th lake and then finally to the 5th. However, the channel doesn't gradually go down 350 feet to meet the lake. It actually only goes about half that distance, at which point a cascade is created where a waterfall drops the water the remaining 160 feet into the channel and finally empties into the last of the lakes. Over 12,000 years, it has continued to erode rock and earth, ever moving the waterfalls backwards where it is today. Where the waterfall is today is actually 7 miles further from the lake than it was 7,000 years ago as it was formed. But all of this action causes a great deal of disturbance. Here, for example, are the whirlpools that are further down the lake that were formed because of all of this action. Very treacherous waters. You can imagine trying to kayak or canoe through something like this. And it is all in that river that runs between that falls and the 5th lake. There are actually 3 waterfalls at the same location. And as the falls sits at the turn of this river, there's actually a horseshoe-shaped fall. So this picture, as you can see on the left, that's actually the waterfalls. The river's to our right. It's going down into the river to the left, and it's horseshoe-shaped. And here's a picture of all 3 falls. Up here on the top, on the right, is the Horseshoe Falls. The main falls you see in the center part of the picture is the second falls. And the third is this very small fall squeezed in between the 2. So there's 3 actual falls there. The Great Lakes, as you know them, Lake Superior flows into Lake Huron. It also flows into Lake Michigan, but Lake Michigan then flows south towards Chicago. So it is not part of this same river flow system. Huron then flows into Erie, and then Erie flows down and drops into Lake Ontario along the Niagara River. And here's a little bit better picture of those 3 falls. The way that we usually go to Niagara Falls on our tours is that we stay in Canada. So where the photo is being taken from is the Canadian side. The right side of the river, as we're looking at it, is the Canadian side. And the Horseshoe Falls you see is considered the Canadian Falls. Then across the river, the flat falls you see are what's known as the American Falls. And the thin little falls there is called the Bridal Veil Falls. So when we come here, we stay for 4 nights in one hotel, get a chance to unpack and really do some fun touring around. I'm only going to share a few photos of the sorts of things that we would be doing. For example, the Hornblower has this great cruise ship that takes you up to the falls. And while it looks like you're going into the falls, you're not. You're just going into the spray. So if you see all the people on board the ship wearing these red ponchos, it's because they are getting wet, but it's not from the full force of the falls. It's just from the mist from the spray. Here is the top of the Horseshoe Falls in what's called Table Rock, which is a visitor center and a very nice restaurant where we always have dinner while we're there. And a great view all the way down the river. This is the hotel we stay in, the Embassy Suites. And interestingly, those murals you see on the wall that show the actual waterfalls are not murals at all. Those are your windows. They overlook the falls. So all of our guests have falls view rooms, and these are the sorts of views that you have out of your windows. It's pretty spectacular. We always visit a winery when we're there up in Niagara on the lake, and do other touring around. So just to give you an idea of the sorts of things we do today. And here, of course, is the nightly lighting that takes place at the falls. So you get to see the spectacular rainbow colors. On to our second tale. This is another tale that involves water. This is a tale of a great river leading to a great city. So the question is, who am I? I call myself Henry, and I'm one of those North American rivers carved out of the retreating glaciers. I've seen 10,000 years of human history along my belly and shores. I'm not the longest, the deepest, or the widest, but through history, I've been one of the most important rivers in the United States. From the earliest time, I've been a resource for man, helping to feed them and provide fresh water. I was once called the Great River of the Mountains. Always, I've been a critical source of transportation, as humans first built rafts and then canoes to float and paddle as I flowed over 300 miles south towards a great harbor. In 1624, a trading post was established right at my mouth and is still there today, though it has grown some since then. I even joined my 2 sister rivers at this point to create an island that is perhaps the most well-known island in the world today. During the movement west, pioneers would set a goal of reaching me, traveling along my current and settling on my shores, or continuing their way further west to the next great river and on until they reached the Pacific. During the Revolutionary War, great sailing ships traveled north and south to help defend and attack critical forts and ports. The palisades of sheer granite that line some of my shoreline were very strategic locations from which cannon could be fired down upon these ships. In fact, I remember one time when men hung a huge chain from one shore across my back to the other shore. I heard the chain was so large and heavy that a single 2-foot link weighed 114 pounds. It stretched 600 yards and weighed 65 tons. And this picture is an actual picture of part of that chain and one link that was 114 pounds. It took the Americans 2 years to build and lasted until 1782 when the war ended. This was floated just where my waist is at its most narrow, and an easy cannon shot from the palisades down to the ships getting caught in the chain. Soon after, the War of 1812 took place, in which I was the prize to be won by either the US or Canada. And if you look on this map, on this picture, you'll see a very narrow point of the river, and that's where the chain stretched. It's right here. During the 19th century, I was proud to be part of the Underground Railroad, as enslaved African Americans fled the southern states into the free northern states, and some even to Canada. There was even a famous period of time during this time when artists lined my shores to paint God's natural setting of river, mountains, and spectacular sunlight sparkling through the trees, making shadows dance along my back. I was astounded when in 1821 to 1825, men built a canal from my headwaters straight west, 363 miles to a great city on a lake, which connected my transportation system to that lake's and on to many others to make life more efficient in the US and even in Canada. By this time, the Gilded Age had arrived, and men of great wealth built summer homes along my shores to get away in the summertime, host great parties, and celebrate their wealth and progress all across the country. Those cottages remain today, though from my perspective, they're really very large mansions and not cottages at all. Meanwhile, that trading post built at my mouth had been growing and growing. In 1886, a very powerful woman arrived to lead the city in a moral crusade. She built her home right in my waters, overlooking the trading post. From here, she governed the growing town and created a pride and sense of freedom so that as the city grew, its people would be open to all with the hope and dream that they could be successful and make a happy home for their families. She, like the new town, was said to be in perpetual motion, always moving forward, always bringing along every citizen with her, always being that beacon upon which all could gaze and remember her promise. So, as you guessed, this fine lady who was so important to the moral character of this city, as well as for the entire country, of course, was the Statue of Liberty. I mentioned that she's in perpetual motion, and a lot of people don't know this. You can't see her feet beneath the robe, but the robe is actually tilted in the back so that if you were to get close, you could see her feet. And her feet are actually in a walking motion. One foot, one heel is up and one toe is down, pointing the other direction. And that's symbolic of the idea that we are always growing and always moving. As you can see in this picture on the right, that other building, that's Ellis Island, where we processed immigrants for many years. And now at the bottom, where you see the Statue of Liberty overlooking Manhattan, that's a current picture. That large tower you see is One World Trade Center, where the Twin Towers used to be. That's what the skyline looks like today. I grew up in New York, and I have to tell you that when the towers came down, it changed the entire skyline. And it's even very different now, having just this one instead of two, but we're all getting used to it. This is the 9/11 Memorial, which we visit usually after we've gone down to the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. And if you haven't been there before, you can see these two reflecting pools. Those are the footprints of the original towers of the World Trade Center. And they're reflecting pools with around the base of them are the names of all of the people lost during the 9/11 attack. This structure you see between the two pools is the 9/11 Museum. It's a beautiful park. This is kind of an early picture before it's grown in, but now these trees have really grown well, and it's a very cool and comfortable place to be. It is not intended to be a frightening place at all. It's intended to be a park in which you can give good thought to your life and to the people around you. The museum has got a lot of artifacts though, so that's a little bit different feeling to it. And here's pictures you can see at the lower right, what it looked like with the Twin Towers and what it looks like now with One World Trade Center. You can see that it's not just that building that changed. Lots of buildings around the towers were destroyed as well, or found to be unsafe afterwards. So new buildings have cropped up, which you see in the picture on the right. And where the picture says, "We'll never forget," those two light beams are actually coming out of the reflecting pool. And it only lights up into the heavens once a year, and that's on September 11th. So that's quite a sight if you happen to be in New York during that time. And of course, our hotel this evening will be at Times Square. We stay within walking distance of dozens of theaters, and literally less than half a block from our front door of the hotel, right out to where the clock and the ball drops at New Year's. So this is what New York looks like. I have to say that since COVID, New York has gotten a lot quieter. It's starting to pick up now. It's getting pretty busy. The Broadway shows will be starting up again in September. They're all in action right now, practicing, rehearsing, doing all of that. So it's a very, will be a very vibrant city once again. We go to the top of the rock, which is Rockefeller Center. And here you get a 360-degree view of all of Manhattan and well beyond. So here we'll be able to see the Hudson River off to our west, and to our east, we'll see the East River, and to our north, we'll see the Harlem River. And the Harlem River connects the Hudson to the East River, and then the East and the Hudson connect down at New York Harbor. So those are the two sister rivers that I mentioned. You'll also get to see north to Central Park. You'll actually be able to see the Statue of Liberty way off in the distance. And so it's a great visit. Now it's on to our third tale. Where is home for Philippe Arsenault? Bonjour, je m'appelle Philippe Arsenault. Oh, pardonnez-moi. I believe you speak English, eh? I will try my best. So let me begin again. Hello, my name is Philippe Arsenault. With 60 other families, my parents left their home in Aquitania region of southern France to settle in the New World. They were dirt farmers who loved the hard scrabble life and prized their freedom to do as they wish and worship who they wish. For 100 years, they established their homes and villages, faithfully working and playing together to make for a happy life. Throughout my family's time there were many wars between our French government and the British. Despite the help of our local Wabanaki friends, the British finally won the war and permanently took control of our country in 1710. I was born into this life in 1730. While digging potatoes and raising pigs was a hard life, it was filled with times of joy when our friends and community would get together and eat and sing and dance. We maintained our cultural heritage and language and generally stayed out of politics, so we were able to coexist with the British. We lived on the shores of a great bay. If you look off into the distance, that's actually a bay of water, and all this lowland is the land that these people lived in and farmed just as it's being farmed today. Twice a day, this bay inhales and exhales so much water that it causes the highest tides in the world, 50-foot tides. It's probably twice the height of most of your homes. So it's so powerful, it turns mighty rivers back upon themselves. In many ways, it was like our clock, telling us when we could do certain work and when we could do other work. We were in a lowland near the bay that was always rich with wet soil. It was believed that all of this land and bay was carved out by the Great Glacier Retreat 10,000 years ago. When I was 22, I fell in love with a girl from a neighboring village. We would sneak away and spend idyllic hours exploring swimming, reading, and falling in love. I had planned a very romantic moment in which to ask her to marry me. I just knew she would say yes. The day arrived, and we had agreed to meet at our favorite hillside overlooking the bay for a picnic. I was ready, and I hoped she was ready too. I got to our hillside early, waiting for her arrival, setting everything up perfectly. Philip, I said, you are the luckiest fellow in the world. As I looked toward her village along the bay, I noticed smoke rising. Not the easy smoke of cooking fires, the fierce smoke of a fire out of control. I raced down the hill to see if I could find her and learn what was happening. I got to the village and her house was gone up in flames, along with the rest of the village, and no sign of my Evangeline. As I searched for her, I came upon a company of British soldiers marching toward my village at the bay. They saw me and bound my hands, and I walked with them so I could not run away. It was mayhem. Our little village church on the bay was filled with our people. There was shouting and arguments, and it was hard to understand what was happening. Finally, a British colonel got everyone's attention and told them all they were to stay in the church until the soldiers came to get them. They then locked the doors, and we remained confused as to why we had all been gathered together and what was to happen next. The fire in the village was still fresh in my mind, and I feared they would do the same for the church. No one in the church knew what had become of Evangeline and her family. No one had seen them before they were brought to the church. Finally, the church door opened, and soldiers stood in the doorway with their muskets ready. I could see beyond them into the bay, and it was madness. Our people were being marched down to the bay in random order. Children were no longer with their parents. Husbands and wives were separated, and everyone was being forced into boats and ships that lined the shore. As they were then being led through this mass confusion, I looked and looked for Evangeline. If I could find her and we could be on the same ship, I knew everything would be fine in the end. Alas, I couldn't, and I was shoved aboard a dinghy that was rowed out to a schooner that I boarded with many other of our people. We were then forced to sail out into the bay. The British lined the shoreline with their muskets and forced us to sail away or be shot. All around my large schooner were boats of every size, floundering in the waves of the bay. It was nearly 50 miles across to the closest land, which was also British. I was one of the fortunate to make a safe crossing. There I searched for sign of Evangeline, but with no luck. Then our flight continued as we wished to find lands occupied by the French that would be more welcoming. We followed the river systems to a northern land we knew to be French, and we stayed there during a very cold winter. Once again, fortune did not favor me as I searched for Evangeline. We were not used to such cold, so in the spring we went back to the rivers and made our way south to another land we knew was French. Here my search ended, as I found Evangeline, and she remembered our love, and we were wed and raised our family in this new place, now called Lafayette in Louisiana. However, when anyone asks where home is, we think of our original home, its wet earth and its beautiful bay, and we say, L'Acadie, Acadia, as tears come to our eyes and we remember our home. This is the story of the Acadian people, somewhat told by Longfellow in his poem called Evangeline. Gabrielle was her fiance, not Philippe that I created. But yes, this is the story of the Acadian people and the great deportation that took place along the shores of the Bay of Fundy, which is the highest tides in the world. Our story takes place in Nova Scotia, and the body of land across the Bay of Fundy is the province of New Brunswick. But the Acadian people settled in all three of those provinces, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. And many of them drifted further away down to along the whole eastern seaboard, but eventually, as I mentioned, they became the Cajuns down in Louisiana. So when we do our tours to the Maritimes, which is what those three provinces are called, the Canadian Maritimes. Here we'll see a few sites on these slides, one of which is Peggy's Cove, this beautiful granite cove you see in that lighthouse. That lighthouse, and some of you may know this because it sounds like some of you have been there, which is very exciting. There's a post office in that lighthouse that allows you to mail postcards and letters if you want back home again. That's kind of a cool thing to do, but it's a beautiful site. And a small fishing village is kind of behind where we're sitting now looking at this picture. Halifax itself is the second largest natural harbor in the world. You can see a little bit of the harbor here, but after Sydney, Australia, it's the second largest. It has a beautiful boardwalk system along the harbor that we get to walk along. We stay at a hotel that's right on the harbor, a Westin hotel, and we're able to walk right into this area where the historic properties are and all the cafes and shops, things like that. Makes a special trip. And then we take a ferry to this island, Prince Edward Island, which is very different from the rest of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Nova Scotia and New Brunswick are all carved, if you will, and the rock has remained from that glacier receding. So all the shorelines have either palisadic sort of rock or rock that slopes down to the bay. But Prince Edward Island is all sand and red clay. And it is very much an agricultural community. So when you go here, you'll see this sort of site. There's no commercial buildings along the shore. This is a potato farm. and potatoes are big. You might have bought in the past the PEI potatoes. They're not as well known as Idaho potatoes or Maine potatoes, but they're still very well known. And they're also well known for their mussels. They grow mussels here quite a bit and harvest them. And lobsters are very big in all three of the provinces. We will definitely have at least one lobster meal over there. But perhaps this is the most famous thing for Prince Edward Island, which is Anne of Green Gables. Lucy Maud Montgomery, who wrote those stories, created this incredible paradise, if you will, and I guess life that was considered something that people cherished as children. And they created a national park for it, which is kind of interesting because it's a fictitious story, but they have a national park that has a Green Gables home in it and a village, and Anne is there. Anne ages out every couple of years though, and they get a new Anne to come in and play the part. Sometimes she has natural red hair, and sometimes she's wearing a wig, but here are a couple of them that are playing in those streets. When we leave Prince Edward Island, we take this bridge, which is only about 12 or 15 years old now, called the Confederation Bridge, that takes us over to New Brunswick. And the coastline to the left, so going up here, is considered the Acadian coast, where a lot of the Acadian people settled. And we'll do some exploring up there. We'll visit an Acadian village. We'll also take a cruise out into this body of water, which is called the Northumberland Strait. It's the warmest water north of Virginia. It's shallow and it's protected between Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick, and that's why it's so warm. But we're taking that cruise out in order to learn how lobstering is done. And on board the boat, we'll actually have a lobster luncheon. In New Brunswick, they prefer their lobster cold. In Prince Edward Island, they prefer it hot. So here we'll actually have cold lobster for our lunch. And we'll then go down to the Bay of Fundy in finishing up our touring in the Maritimes. And there you'll see the incredible impact of those tides. I showed you a couple of images of the flower pot rocks, as they're known, the Hopewell rocks, where the tides have carved out these mushroom-shaped islands that at high tide look like islands, and at low tide, we'll be able to walk along the ocean floor and get to see it from a very unique perspective. We're on to our final tale. And here, this tale, we're calling the Silver Cottage. And it's the Silver Cottage. It is actually my home. It's where I am today. It's where I'm sitting. In 1951, my wife's grandparents were vacationing in this popular resort area when they decided to purchase a small cottage as a second home. Grandpa bought the house as a gift to Grandma to celebrate their 25th anniversary and christened it the Silver Cottage. The cottage was built in 1865, so it was almost 100 years old when they bought it. However, it was not built like most houses. It was a new house built with old wood from a nearby island. The land it sits upon now and the island from which it came were shaped by the glacier's retreat. What was left behind are sweeping miles of sand whose shapes change every year as the tides, currents, winds, and storms move sand all around their shores. Just 30 miles off the coast, an island nicknamed the Little Gray Lady sits like a diamond in the middle of an ocean. It's shaped like a crescent moon. That's it in the upper left-hand corner. And it's only 7 miles long. First settled in 1641, 30 years later, an unusual event took place that would lead to 200 years of economic vitality. A large gray whale, then known as a scrag, wandered into the harbor and was pursued and killed by the settlers. From that day, the whaling industry was born. Ship's captains built large homes in the downtown area, one next to another, and created almost an urban environment of this spit of sand. Even Herman Melville wrote about it when he wrote of his epic, Moby Dick. During that time, in the early 1700s, a meeting house was built for gatherings, scripture readings, and all sorts of community activities. But by 1850, the whaling industry was in decline. The ship's captains' homes that managed to survive the Great Fire of 1846 were abandoned. The wonderful meeting house that had been responsible for so much activity was left empty. At the same time, though, back on the mainland, most of the 75-mile-long peninsula was pasture land. What little lumber there was had been used to build homes, and the land was needed for livestock and agriculture. The greatest crop then, and still is today, is cranberries. This is a picture of a wet harvest of a cranberry bog. At that time, a well-known local man was preparing for the marriage of his daughter, and later a marriage for his son. His name was America Nickerson, and for his wedding gift, he wanted to build them each their own houses on land he owned. But there wasn't any lumber. Being an enterprising Yankee, he went to where lumber was very cheap, even free. He sailed across to that island and took apart that wonderful old meeting house, board by board, in a process called flaking. This is that house today. Wall was dropped upon wall, beams were salvaged, bricks were saved, and they brought all these materials to a ship and sailed it back across the Sound to the mainland. First, his daughter's house was built, and then on the acreage beside it, he built his son's house. The two houses were just 100 yards apart and made for a great family estate for another 100 years. Just imagine, that wood was already 150 years old, was used to rebuild two houses that have continued to be homes for another 150 years. This is a side shot of that house where I'm going to bring the camera closer. Between the first two windows you see on the ground floor, you're going to see where the clapboarding has been cut in a straight line. And hopefully you can see that right here. And that was the process of flaking. So these clapboards were the original clapboards on the original meeting house on Nantucket that in 1865 was cut down, and the walls then collapsed one upon the other, stacked, brought to the schooner, and the schooner was then brought to the harbor and sailed across the sea. Both children decided that they wanted modern houses and built in a Greek revival design. And that was this picture you see here of the front of the house is a classic Greek revival design. You've probably heard of a Cape Cod sort of home where you have a door in the middle and windows on each side. This is a Greek revival home where you have a formal entrance and you have a large picture window in the second floor above, and then just two windows to the side. In the original house, you would have had a fan light in that large window at the top. By a fan light, I mean a light that is semicircular and has multiple panes of glass like a fan. And that fan light would help show anybody looking at the house how wealthy the people were that were inside it, because glass was very expensive. And if you had a fan light that had many panes of glass, you were probably wealthy. And if you just had just one pane of glass or two panes of glass, why, that was just not the same. So into this question of what they were going to put into each of their homes was some of the original great features of that meeting house. And here today, our home is the home of the sons. The daughter decided it was too old-fashioned to have the meeting house doors, which you see here. They're folded back against the wall, and to the right of it is its pair, and those meeting house doors can be closed to separate our living room, which is where the picture is taken from, into, well, we call this room over here the do room, because it's where we do things. It's a sort of a playroom. And the other thing that she didn't want to have, we're so excited to have, which is the wooden spiral staircase that takes you up to the second floor. This house was moved again back in 2001. So it was moved from Nantucket to this location. Oh, I gave away a clue. And now was moved again to a location that we're in. So this mainland is a peninsula that sticks out into the ocean like a bent arm with its bicep flexed. It was named for its huge fish that were so plentiful, it was said you could walk across the water on their backs. Between 1849 and 1855, Henry David Thoreau came to this land, walked its length, and wrote of his journey. He wrote, "The lighthouse lamps were still burning, though now with a silvery luster, when I rose to see the sun come out of the ocean. For he still rose eastward of us, but I was convinced that he must have come out of a dry bed beyond that stream, though he seemed to come out of the water." And then in a touch of poetry, he wrote, "The sun once more touched the fields, mounting to heaven from the fair flowing, deep running ocean." As a landlubber, it can be shocking and even intimidating to encounter the force of nature that comes to the ocean's shore. Thoreau learns to appreciate all that he has walked by the end of his travelogue, as he concludes, "A man can stand here and put all of America behind him." And indeed, visitors and residents alike come here to get away from the busy cities, to get away from their farmlands, to get away from the suburban areas. They come for the misty, moisty mornings, for ocean breezes, cold ocean swimming. It's a place like no other. So, where is this Silver Cottage? This is Cape Cod. The Silver Cottage is on the mainland, on Cape Cod itself, and the island was the island of Nantucket. These are the scenes. This is where my home is. It's not, I don't live on the water like this, but this is our bays and gulfs and embayments that lead out eventually to the Atlantic Ocean. And every day is remarkable, whether it's a sunny day or a misty day or rainy day, when you have this sort of vista. I imagine in the Midwest, it's somewhat like seeing the sunrise and set on your land on either end. Here on the East Coast, we only see the sunrise over the water. We can't see the sunset over water very easily. Because the Cape curves around Cape Cod Bay, we can see a little bit of that sunset over water, but mostly the sunset's over trees and other shoreline. But that beauty that you experience when you look across the plains and see the sunrise and sunset is what we experience here with water. That arm of Cape Cod, which you saw being bent up into this shape, this entire outer bank, that whole shoreline is National Seashore. It was created in the 1960s as the second national seashore after the one down Cape Hatteras in North Carolina by John F. Kennedy. Kennedy, of course, the Kennedy family has their legacy on the Cape in the town of Hyannis. But this is what the National Seashore looks like. It is 35 miles of stretch of sand and sand dunes that can be as high as 150 feet overlooking the ocean, or as low as being right at ocean level. There are two islands off of Cape Cod. One is Martha's Vineyard, which we call the Storybook Island, and the other is Nantucket, which you've already seen, which is called the Little Gray Lady. On our tour, we go to both islands. So one day we go to Martha's Vineyard. The next day we do a tour entirely of the Cape, and we do a whale watch cruise and get to see the very end of the Cape and the National Seashore. We get to visit the sort of area in which the Kennedys lived or still live. And then we go to Nantucket before we leave the Cape. So these are scenes of Martha's Vineyard. This is an edge of Martha's Vineyard, and these are clay cliffs. It's part of a Native American property now. And these clay cliffs, as the tide comes in and out, our tide is nothing like the Bay of Fundy, by the way. Our tides might run as high as 7 feet, maybe at the most. And that clay will come drifting down into water and change the color of the water, which is fun to see. Here's a shot of Hyannis Port, where the Kennedys live. And that lower left-hand picture is the Kennedy compound. Most people think a compound has got big concrete walls around it. In fact, these are traditional Cape Cod homes with cedar shingling and clapboard siding, for the homes, and the walls are not walls at all. They're just simply large hedges that go around it. But as visitors, we don't go into the property at all, but you can drive by and see how it sits on the harbor. And there's a very nice memorial, a reflecting pool to JFK, which is that rock wall you see, and that overlooks the place where JFK and his family would do their boating at the small little yacht club there. That's our adventures today. Those are our 4 trips. And I wanted to, the reason all of those 4 trips were in a kind of a similar area, being in the Northeast, is because my company, which is Hospitality Tours, for 40 years, all we've done is tours into the Northeast. So this is our product region. We start as further south as Virginia Beach, which isn't that far south, make our way through Washington, D.C., up into Pennsylvania, over to Niagara Falls. We're going east into New York City and all of the Hudson River Valley, and then all the way through the New England states. But while we talk about a lot of states there, you should understand that it's not that big a place. So my cursor is showing you where I'm sitting right now. That's where the Silver Cottage sits, right in the ocean where Cape Cod bends its arm. If I were to drive 350 miles from here going straight west, I would go through Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and into Pennsylvania. I venture to say that if you drove 350 miles west from Lincoln, you would still be in Nebraska. Also, we will have passed by about 14 million people in all of that distance. So it's a lot of people in a small space, and yet there's so much to see and do in this little place that it makes for lots of great tours that we get to do. But the other part that is a part of our product area is Canada. So this is Eastern Canada and what we call Atlantic Canada and the Maritimes. So here we basically are only as far west as Niagara Falls, and then take the St. Lawrence Seaway, which somebody had mentioned in one of their guesses. That's the seaway that the Acadian people took to get to Quebec for that cold winter before they then made their way down to Lafayette. And that would include Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec City. We have a beautiful tour that does Montreal and Quebec City called the Shrines of Quebec, which visits many of the Catholic shrines that are there in Canada. And then the Maritimes, which you just experienced. This is Nova Scotia, and this little island here is Prince Edward Island, and then the large province is New Brunswick. So the tour that we showed you was going into Halifax, taking the ferry to PEI, the bridge back to New Brunswick, going along the Bay of Fundy, and then coming back to Halifax. I mentioned that you can do more because this island is the island of Cape Breton that I mentioned to you. That's the sort of Scottish Highlands area. Beautiful, beautiful area. They make up the Maritimes, but they're also part of Atlantic Canada, which is a 4th province, and that's the one you see in the upper right. This is Newfoundland and Labrador. That is its own destination, though. We don't go to the Maritimes and include Newfoundland as part of it. It is just too big of a place. You can see how large it is. It's a massive island. It's called the Rock. It's almost all above tundra level, so there's not a lot of trees. The geology is spectacular. There's only one place on Earth that the Earth's mantle has broken through the surface of the Earth, and that's up here in Newfoundland. So it also makes for a great trip. So here's my contact information, and I'm always happy to take your calls or emails. I'll leave this up here on the slide for a moment, and you're welcome to take that information. I hope everyone enjoyed themselves.
I think you did fine, Ted. Thank you so much. Let's give Ted Nelson a big round of applause. I'm hearing great things like, thank you so much. All of these are areas we've never been to and never seen. So this was very interesting. We hope you had a great time today. I'm hearing all of these fun things or seeing them in the chat. Enjoyed the tour. Would love to get back to that area. So Ted, you were a big hit. I'd like to thank you all for your time today. We have some other fun things coming up. We still don't have the okay to travel again, but we're keeping you. We want to keep you engaged. So in September, we're going to do, I'll just let the cat out of the bag. We'll do a special movie event. And we're also bringing back Smarter in September, our virtual series that started it all. So we'll be here Tuesdays in September. Topics will be released. I'm working on the Journey newsletter now. So you'll be hearing more. And what else do we have? We just have lots of stuff coming up. Customer Appreciation Day is just right around the corner. It's this Friday, July 23rd. So drop by your favorite branch or all your favorite branches for a sandwich and some water. I'm getting so many more comments. Thank you so much. Fun program. Let's travel. Great job, Ted. Okay. Well, with that, I wish you all a fabulous, fabulous week. Ted, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
Welcome, everyone.